Good afternoon, everyone. All of us were asked to give a view of the future, and we were supposed to offer hope. Well, I've got some good news and some bad news, and maybe some hope as well. This is the stark reality of the future post-Brexit. We will certainly have fewer active ingredients, not just because of Brexit, but because of all the hurdles that were mentioned earlier. It's getting more and more and more difficult to actually get new actives and to get them onto the market because of the tighter regulatory controls. The hurdles are getting higher and higher, so you will have fewer active ingredients to play within the armoury. There will be more actives that will come under threat. So we know quite a lot about what's going to disappear, what's under threat, but the newer actives will come on and they will come under threat as well. We've just heard about herbicide resistance in blackgrass, but fungicide resistance is a big issue for us, and it's going to get worse. So the fewer active ingredients we have, the less we have in the armoury, so the more difficult it is for us to come up with anti-resistance strategies. So it's a kind of double whammy. Losing actives, having fewer actives coming onto the market, just makes it much, much more difficult to actually manage resistance development. And all of that leads to uncertainty. So the uncertainty in the next 5 years, quite a short time scale, I'm going to try and go through some of the uncertainties. This is just a snapshot of what we saw this year. These are all photographs I took this year of diseases in wheat. And most people in this audience couldn't tell me what half of those are, and nor could I. These were very difficult things in fields. We were getting new diseases, we were getting old diseases, and we were getting odd symptoms of existing diseases. And that makes it very difficult for trials officers. NIAB trials officers were coming to my office on a weekly basis going through April, May and June saying, what on earth is this? So some of these are new diseases coming along that we have to deal with. We have plenty of old diseases. Septoria tritici still our number one. The triazoles, which I'll come to right at the end, the triazoles still really important for controlling septoria. Yes, we have new chemistry, but the triazoles have served us really well for 20 odd years, and they are still really important in protecting some of the new chemistry, and we will certainly lose some of them. I put this in not because it's got anything to do with Brexit, but just to show that yellow rust has no care about country boundaries. We now are pretty certain that this yellow rust range of races that we call the warrior population came all the way from the Himalayas. So it just came straight across Europe, infected most of Europe, including the UK, and we're still going through a battle with these races. But these yellow rust races, very aggressive and are very, very serious, almost, for some parts of the country, as serious as Septoria tritici. This fooled a lot of people this year. Tanspot is a disease that's common at low levels in the UK, quite common at high levels in some parts of Europe. We don't really have very much good information on varietal susceptibility to this, but this caused a lot of problems in crops this year. People complaining about getting poor control of septoria, and it was actually this that was causing the problem. Combination of Tanspot and Septoria nodorum, which I hadn't seen for a long, long time. So the climate change scenarios which lead to these sort of diseases coming in, we have to deal with as well as another uncertainty. This depends whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. We often talked about the yield plateau historically, and NIAB was involved in doing a project for the AHDB on looking at the reasons behind this yield plateau in wheat. If you're an optimist, you look right from the beginning, 1953, which is actually the year I was born, so I can claim some responsibility for this rise in wheat yields, certainly up to the 85. But it's been a plateau ever since, and really, even though we've had good yields the last 2 or 3 years, we still think there's a limit there. And we were just about confident about that, and then we had this. So we finally claimed off the New Zealanders. I was talking to a New Zealander just before we came in here, and pointed out that the UK now holds the world record for wheat yields. This is not a trivial thing. The fact that Rod Smith up in Northumberland grew a crop of wheat with 16.5 tons, that tells you not necessarily how good a farmer he is, but he's obviously a very good farmer, but what the genetic potential of the existing varieties is. So the varieties we're offered through the recommended list system have a massive genetic potential. So if you can get a 16.5 ton crop out of a normal wheat variety, then that shows you how good the genetic potential is. NIAB's trying to do its own bit in this, and we're looking at different ways of managing these varieties. This is another way of looking at the recommended list. So I've just put all the recommended list varieties on here. So the blue diamonds at the top are the treated yield. So they're the fungicide treated yield, which is what most people look at. But the red squares underneath are the untreated yields of those same varieties. And the red dotted line it shows you if all varieties performed exactly the same in terms of disease resistance. But you can see along the bottom there are a number of varieties there that are way, way down. And these, in this case, I've just highlighted all the varieties because those are all yellow rust susceptible varieties. And the one on your left, the lowest one, happens to be Reflection. And that gave a 6.8 ton per hectare response to fungicides. And the average of all of those varieties was nearly 4 tons per hectare. So fungicides play an enormously important part in achieving these high yields. So plant breeders have done a fantastic job in terms of giving us high yielding varieties with massive genetic potential. But there is a degree of reliance on pesticides to achieve those high yields. And that's a problem when you've got loss of pesticides, loss of active ingredients. That's going to make the job much more difficult. A slightly different way of looking at the same data, which is what I've done to try and help people understand how to apply and how much fungicide to apply, is to plot the recommended list like this. Now I've grouped all the varieties there into 2 groups. So the green ones at the top are unresponsive varieties, and the yellow lines at the bottom are very responsive varieties. And you can see typically a very responsive variety, the yellow ones, have very low untreated yield. So at the far left-hand side, that's the untreated yield. As you apply more and more fungicide, the yield goes up and then eventually plateaus. But although you can get very high yields from very dirty varieties, what you really want are those varieties at the top. So those of you who are, all the men who are red-green colorblind, it's the grey lines at the top, the 3 grey lines at the top, and that happens to be Belgrade, Crispin and Siskin. Now I just chose those 3 because they're very high yielding, but they've actually got very high untreated yields. And that's what you need, that's as a farmer, because that takes out a lot of the uncertainty of season and site and location. So if you can grow something and you really mess it up and you're growing that type of variety, the level of uncertainty of the outcome is much less. And that's what you need. You could grow these very dirty, very high yielding varieties. You can do that now because you've got triazoles and SDHI and Barvo and Mancozeb. You've got all sorts of things. But in the future, you won't have all of those products and all of that armory. So I think this puts emphasis on the plant breeders and people like ourselves who want to understand how to manage varieties. And NIAB's trying to do its bit in this. Plant breeding is a really successful story about cooperation between researchers and plant breeders, commercial plant breeders. And this refers to the NIAB synthetic wheat program. So this is a program where we crossed from left to right in that little perspex jar. The one on the left is a goat grass. It's a wild grass species. And we crossed that with the next one, which was durum wheat. And that gave us that thing in the middle. That's a synthetic wheat that we've recreated by crossing a goat grass with a durum wheat. You then cross that with any elite variety you like, which in this case was Zy19, but then the one on the right is the outcome. That's the super wheat. So that's the progeny from a cross between an elite variety and a synthetic wheat variety. And that's giving us a very big step forward in terms of yield. We've got a huge range of tests to still do, but hopefully we can get high yield and good disease resistance and good nitrogen use efficiency. So the plant breeding program that's going on, we're working with UK plant breeders. We're giving this material to UK plant breeders so that they can incorporate it into their breeding programs, and that's already ongoing. So in the next 4 or 5 years, hopefully some of these very high yielding varieties will have come out of this UK synthetic wheat program. Once you've got a synthetic wheat and you've got a super wheat, you still have to manage it. And for years I've been saying, well, we haven't got any fungicides, there are no fungicides coming, and then bugger me, suddenly we've got 4 fungicides to talk about. And these are all really good. Now, you won't have heard of some of them. Some of them you can talk to the manufacturers here. On the left, you've got Revysol. Now, Revysol is a new triazole, which is a bit strange, considering we think the EU are going to ban them all. Well, they won't be banning them all. We will have some triazoles left, and we will almost certainly have Revysol, which is a new triazole. Solatenol is the Syngenta new SDHI. Again, very good product. Innotrec, which is the third one there, is a completely new mode of action. Now, that's very, very welcome in this arena where we need new modes of action to help protect existing modes of action. And coming up on the rear there is Ascra. Now, Ascra, you can go and talk to the Bayer guys just outside here. Ascra is a mixture of 2 SDHIs and a very good triazole. And that, I think, is the future. The future is mixtures of 2 and 3 and 4-way products. And it's really important that the triazoles in this scenario help protect existing chemistry and new chemistry as well. So there's some good news in there, there's some bad news. A lot of the triazoles that you use now will go through the endocrine disruption legislation in the EU. The ones that are left will come under enormous pressure because you'll have a very limited range to use. That will put pressure on the SDHIs, and we really, at the moment, until the plant breeding programs come through, and that could be 5 or 10 years before we get very, very high disease resistance, you're going to need these products. The Dow product, Innotrec, very, very welcome, new active ingredient. Multi-sites, people say, well, we've still got Bravo. Bravo will come under pressure. You'll probably still have it, but you will have a reduced use of it. The good news is the varieties are getting better. So the varieties that are coming onto the recommended list are getting better, high yields with good disease resistance. But this interaction of how you actually manage those varieties will become much more important with fewer active ingredients. And I don't know whether it's good news or bad news. I suspect yields overall in Europe will go down, but actually wheat prices will probably go up. So from a farmer's point of view, it probably will be status quo. Thank you.